Alrighty, this is sherry for the WSET Diploma Level 4 D5 Fortified Production. Moors, 800 to 1300s. Prohibition. Christianity comes in after 1300s. Exports to English, Flemish, Irish, and then after Columbus to the Americas. The Peninsular Wars and phylloxera really upset production in the 1800s. However, production was still strong. Imitation sherry came online in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, which gave sherry a bit of a bad rep. In 1933, as a result of that, the Consejo Regulador was founded. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Set regulations to control quality and trading. Sales for sherry peaked in the 1970s, specifically 1979, 1.5 million hectoliters in 1979. Steep drop off since then. Till this day, massive drop off in production for sherry wines. New generation finding new styles of wine. Oversupply equates to cheap and badly made wines, thus making the problem worse. The WSET references a producer known as Rumasa, that is started in the 1950s, took over many sherry houses, expanded into hotels, banks, created somewhat of a business empire, but really in terms of sherry was a really big reason why we had some upset. So in 1983, the government found out that Rumasa wasn't paying their taxes. So all sherry production kind of blew up after that. And a lot of the little bits and pieces of different sherry houses kind of got swallowed up by other sherry houses, went out of business. It really upset the sherry business as they knew it back then. So everything fucked up is what I have written down here. 1933's Consejo Regulador is trying to clean up, still probably trying to clean up till this day. Production is still, as I said, pretty lacking. The growing environment. So sherry is grown in Andalusia. It is the south part of Spain. It's a very southern region in all of Europe. The production zone is 0 to 90 meters above sea level. That is basically sea level and slightly above sea level. The region is a hot Mediterranean climate. It is not a warm climate. It is a hot Mediterranean climate. Hot, dry summers, mild, relatively rainy winters, according to the Court of Masters Sommelier's documentary that I watched, a little 13-minute docu-series that they do. The gentleman said when it rains quite hard in this region. A lot of that is probably from direct influence from the Atlantic Ocean. So 2 major wind systems. This is incredibly important. This is Poniente, Poniente, which is the cooling, damp wind from the Atlantic. Cools during the summertime. It cools things down, kind of helps to mitigate things. Levante is the hot, dry air that comes from northern Africa, and this makes the climate very dry and very arid. Jerez, the region in which a lot of the production housing takes place, is sunny. It has very high UV pressure. It has very low cloud density. This makes for a really ripe, high quality vines, even though most of Palominos is relatively neutral. The negative downside to that is we do potentially get some sunburn to grapes. So yeah. Region. The name of the region is what we're going to go over is the zona of production, okay? Or the Marco de Jerez. This is 7,000 hectares, just slightly under 7,000 hectares is the whole area, and we call it kind of the zona de crianza, or the sherry triangle. It's the other name for it. It's kind of the unofficial name for it. So here we go. Grapes grown can be used for 2 DOs. That is DO, Jerez, sherry. That's basically Jerez. It's basically Jerez, sherry. Okay, that's a DO. The other one is Manzanilla. That is Manzanilla de Sanlúcar de Barrameda. That is the name of the region and the name of the style of wine. Manzanilla is the style of the wine. Sanlúcar de Barrameda is one of the towns in which all wine from that DO has to be matured and I believe made and bottled. So, yeah, a lot of the emphasis on sherry is the maturation process, and we'll get into that in a little bit. There is a rare exception, Pedro Jimenez, the grape that's used typically for sweetening wines and creating its own very naturally sweet wine. We'll get into naturally sweetened wines a little bit later. But that one, that specific varietal can be grown in Montilla, as in Montilla Morales, which is near Malaga. It's on the more eastern side of the peninsula there. Has to be matured in the Marco de Jerez, though. So it does have to be, once again, as I mentioned earlier, does have to be produced, has to be matured in the Marco de Jerez, in the sherry production zone. Split into two major parts. There is Jerez Superior, which equates for about 90% of all plantings with Albaritza soils. We'll talk about soils in a second. And then the Zona, the Jerez Zona, which is a delimit, which is just the greater area. And then the third thing that's listed here for regions is the Bagos system. So Bagos is essentially kind of like, think of it as the village level. There are some wines are actually states that they're not approved, so we'll talk about that later. But Pagos is the different areas. Maybe let's call it sub-AVAs like Napa. So you have Coombsville Pago, and you have Oakville Pago, and you have Calistoga Pago. These are just different little regions that are kind of delimited throughout the area. There is, according to the text, according to the textbook, there is some ongoing legislation involving possible use of Pagos in labeling. Okay. Soils. Albaritza is the most important soil we're going to use. I'm going to do this with my eyes closed because it's important. Albaritza is it's a composition of soils, and that is limestone, it is silica, and it is clay. Really the most important here being clay. So clay is incredibly important for retaining water content. In this region, it is hot. Okay. We got that Levante. We got that extremely hot air. And that's coming up from Northern Africa, and any sort of rain we can get and hold on to is really good for the groundwater. Now, clay is going to hold a lot of that groundwater. The limestone has a very high calcium carbonate content. Okay. That's chalky kind of content. Okay. So you get this really strong white color. Doesn't really go too much into silica, but you get this really strong white color, and that really helps to reflect UV pressure to the underside of the grapes, which helps them to, of course, reach maturity a little bit more, ripen a little bit more. However, it forms a crust. Albaritza forms a crust, okay? And this crust is really important because it helps to keep the water under that crust. And clay is great for water retention. Crust lowers evaporation. High water retention equals possibility for high density planting. So what I have in my notes, I'm going back to my notes now. Possibility for high density planting. This is extremely important in the region, and I'm wondering if I'm jumping ahead here. I'm just going to say it. We don't need a lot of concentration in Palomino grapes. Palomino equates to 99% of all production of grape varietals. There is Muscat of Alexandria, which is approved grape varietal, and you do have Pedro Jimenez. However, the vast majority of plantings are from the Palomino grape, okay? Palomino is extremely neutral varietal. You're getting most of your flavor from the maturation process, not from the primary fruit component. Most of that primary fruit is going to be lost during biological aging anyways. We're jumping ahead here, but you want high density plantings. The majority, now 60% of all vineyard acreage is now automated, guys. Automated production. Okay, so that's automated tilling, that's automated leaf, automated everything, automated harvesting, automated, I thinking of the word. They're clipping. Clip it, clip it, clip. Whatever. Automated, cut. All right. Light color for Alvaritza allows us to reflect and aid ripening. Limestone silica clay. There's two other important might come up on the exam. Not very important, but I am going to mention them. They are barros. Okay, barros is pardon me. Ooh. Barros is more of a clay dominant soil, and then you have the arenas, which is the sand based soil, which typically does very well, I guess, for muscatel, aka Muscat of Alexandria. We'll get to that later. Grape varieties. We are talking about the Palomino grape. Principal variety, 99% of production. Mid to late ripening, well suited to dry and sunny regions, capable of large yields, loses acidity quickly, so you have to be very careful, and it is extremely neutral. Muscatel, Muscat of Alexandria, grows on arenas, the sandy soil, late ripening, well adapted to heat and drought, and quite aromatic, very good for sweet styles. The last grape is Pedro Jimenez, also known as PX. I wrote here in parentheses Pinot Jimenez just to remember something. It is a sweetening agent as well as a varietal. It is small. It is thin-skinned. It has very high sugar levels. That's why I put Pinot, thin-skinned and small. Neutral varietals. Equal favor comes from the drying and maturation process, very similar to the appassimento process in Italy. Can be grown/dried in Montilla as well, but has to be shipped to the from the zone of production, to and from the zone of production. So you can dry them outside of the region, but you have to mature them and make the wines in the zone of production. Vineyard management. Production is evolving. Most of the plantings are now to accommodate mechanization, which is, as I mentioned earlier, about 60% of all production is now mechanized. Okay. Pruning, harvesting, that was the fucking word I was looking for. Pruning, harvesting, soil management. New plantings are using cordon training with VSP. Okay. Vertical shoot positioning. We should all know that by now. Double or single cordon. Okay. Think Napa Valley. Think any newer high quality region that is starting to figure out how to plant grapes in the 21st century. Okay. The vast majority of grapes that are being replanted, the vast majority of vineyard sites that are being replanted are cordon system VSP. Okay. That helps with basically most maladies in the wine business. Okay. So always a good guess if you ever have a question on an exam and they want to know how things are done, which is ironic because in Spain there's a shit ton of head training. But newer plantings, you can always kind of hedge that way. Newer plantings are being planted with cordon training with VSP. Max yield for sherry is 80 hectoliters per hectare. That is the max yield. Most of the time, it's going to be somewhere between 60 and 70 hectoliters per hectare. Most sites are gentle slopes, that's 0 to 90%, 0 to 90 meters of elevation. Those are gentle slopes, and then you get to the meseta in the middle of the country, and we don't really need to talk about that later. Soil is worked to create troughs to allow rain to trickle down. Asperia, I think is how you say that. And that's done mechanically. So a big part of those crusts that we were talking about, crusts from the Alvaritza soil. That's right, Alvaritza, ladies and gentlemen. That's going to be limestone, silica, and clay. Alvaritza soil. Big part of that Alvaritza soil, that crust that forms, we got to make troughs so we can hold in the water even more. A lot of this hot, dry region, we're trying to retain water. Okay. Rootstocks chosen are Vitis vinifera and Vitis berlandieri kind of crosses. So the main reason for that is limestone tolerance, probably on the Vitis vinifera side, and then drought resistance, which by far Vitis berlandieri, which I believe is most likely indigenous to Texas, the southern United States, is really good for drought resistance. And also, both of those will produce a relatively decent yield as well for the grapes. VSP training of vines helps mitigate mildew from the poniente, that is the cold Atlantic wind that's coming in, not to be confused with the levante. It's important to say these 20,000 times a day, which is the warm, arid, dry air that comes from Africa. That is the levante. The poniente is coming from the Atlantic Ocean. It's cold. European grape moths suck. So they still have to deal with the European grape moths. Harvest is traditionally in the first week of August through to September. They will start more inland and they will move to the coast. Okay, so kind of makes sense if you think about it. You're going to have the most continental climate, more inland, hotter, consistent. And then as you get to the coast, it's going to be, I guess, a little bit more cool and damp, and you'll have a little bit more issues with harvesting earlier towards the coast. Harvest is early. Okay, this is to reduce chance of rainfall. Basically, we're not looking for primary fruit flavors for palomino for the most part. So we want to harvest when we can. Anytime we can mitigate, late fall, mid-fall rain, which we just had here in Napa Valley about 2 days ago, which is not very good for the 2023 vintage. But yeah, anytime we can harvest before drama, that's a dub in our business. So that's a W. We only need potential alcohol of 12% for the Palomino grape. Total acidity does need to remain above 5 grams per liter. However, acidification is approved and often used if titratable acidity is low, or also known as total acidity. PX and Muscatel, those are later harvests. Obviously, we're trying to acquire a little bit more sugar content, a little higher Brix levels. 60% currently mech, mostly done at night, mechanical production. Yeah, mentioned that earlier. Winemaking. Grapes are instantly pressed. There's no skin contact. Skin contact is very bad for flor development in biologically aged sherries. Free run, first press, is about 60 to 75% of all juice yield, okay? That's... cancel that. Must is clarified before fermentation. This is very important, guys. Very important. Must has to be clarified before fermentation. That Albaritza soil, it's very high in calcium carbonate, and I talked to you about that. It's dusty. It's little fine particles. Okay, that gives you that really nice flinty or it's limestone. It's chalk. It gives you that minerality kick. However, it gets all up in the barrels. So we need to clarify the wine before the wine gets fermented. Okay. Musts from different sites and different pagos will ferment separately. We're fermenting separate lots, and then we can blend lots as we go. Different base wines equals future blendings. We're using cultured yeast. We're typically fermenting at 70 to 79 degrees. Stainless steel tanks or neutral oak barrels. Oak barrels possibly give the wine a little bit more body even when neutral. It's important to note that malolactic fermentation is blocked. Okay, we don't do MLF. Buttery aromas are not important in the production. And then to block MLF, it's very important also, and we don't want that rich round flavor. We want that lean, crisp texture, not flavor, pardon me, texture. You can only do it by chilling the must. SO2 additions to block MLF is really bad impact on flor. So these sherry wines are very neatly produced because SO2 is really dangerous, and we don't just get to cover things up with SO2 in sherry production. So all base wines will be classified at completion. This is what we call the first classification. Okay, so after the wine is fully fermented, wine will go through its first classification. All right, lighter, less intense flavored wines, thinner wines will go off for biological aging. Okay, and we'll talk about that later. The more full-bodied, more intense style of wines will get classified for oxidative aging. That's your Oloroso Plus. We'll talk about that in a second. Wines destined for biological aging will be fortified. Okay, this is after the primary fermentation. We're going to fortify these wines. 15 to 15.5. Okay. If the Court of Master Sommeliers just says 15, whatever. Do your best. If you can remember that stupid little range, do it. Wines designated for oxidative aging will be boosted to 17% ABV. The reason for that, floor yeast cannot develop after about 15-16% alcohol, guys. So the wines that are going to the biological aging will get fortified to about 15 degrees alcohol, and then the oxidative will always be 17 and above. 95% grape ABV grape spirit is used, not to be confused with like aguardiente and stuff like that. This is a 95% ABV grape spirit. Floor only grows at 15 to 15.5% ABV. We know that. Cool. After fortifying, wine is stored in what's referred to as the sobre tablas, and I'm gonna probably fucking butchering that right now. Sobre tablas. Okay, this is the fictional weird. Before it enters the Solera, it's sitting in like the waiting room. Think of it as like the waiting room. Okay, it's sitting in the waiting room, and this is allowing biological wines to develop flor. After months, biologically aged wines will have a second classification. Okay, wines with a full layer of flor, still light, still fresh. Those will be designated for Fino and Manzanilla style sherries, my favorite sherries, one I'll have in just a minute. Less light, less fresh. Those will go off into Amontillado and Palo Cortado style wines. So after that second classification for biological and then to wines that will then go on to started as biological but will go into and I'll put a huge graph down here later so it's a little bit so we have some visual stuff to work with, but less wines enter the Solera system and enter the Criadera system. Yeah. So, yeah. All right, let's talk about maturation. We're going to get into the nitty gritty here. This is going to be where we're going to talk about the Solera system and the development of it. All right. Wines must be matured in the sherry triangle. Okay, that's Jerez, one town Jerez, one town Puerto de Santa Maria, and the third town, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, which of course is where Manzanilla production will have to take place, okay? For the Dio Manzanilla. Its full name is Dio Manzanilla de Sanlúcar de Barrameda. Okay. Bodega design is designed, that's stupid. Let's say bodega structure is designed to create and maintain temperatures for Solera storage, okay? So these buildings, they're very old, and they were built hundreds of years before air conditioning. So they have thick walls to keep temperatures consistent. They have very high ceilings. Warm air will rise. Okay, they have these windows with these shutters, and they don't really do a good job of explaining this in the book, but fuck it. Which allow hot air to escape, but allow the humidity to continue, something like that. Earthen floors, wet. They'll wet these earthen floors, and they will lower the temperatures because you have wet, damp floor. Kind of maybe not OSHA approved. Solera system. Let's get to it. Most sherry is non-vintage sherry. The Solera is basically a system revolving around a concept called fractional blending. Okay. You will hear that word a lot. That is a buzzword. You should definitely put that on your exams, whether it's Court of Master Sommeliers or WSET or CSW or whatever the fuck you're studying for. Sections broken down into criaderas. Those are the different levels, okay? And you'll often see this vertically taught. You'll see it taught as kind of a pyramid shaped diagram. However, that's not usually how it's actually done. Most of the time this is done by complete lots, and it's kind of done they don't stack them up like a pyramid. It doesn't actually work that way, but we'll see a diagram in just a second. The oldest criadera, the one that would typically be bottled for highest quality production, is known as the Solera. So not to be extremely fucking confusing. But the entire system is called a Solera, and then the last place in which you would, sorry, I just got a text. The whole system is called the Solera, but also the final rung, the oldest rung in the system, is also referred to as the Solera. You then will have the second oldest rung will be the first Criadera. The third oldest rung will be the second Criadera, and then copy paste to infinitum. There are some Soleras that are 7, 15 Criadera long. So these maturation houses, which we'll get into in a minute, are hundreds of years old, some of them. So it's pretty gnarly. No more than 40% of a Solera, the oldest level of the entire system, can be bottled in a single year. So there is PDO Consejo Regulador restrictions that don't allow you to take any more than 40% of your final Solera for bottling every year. Now, kind of confusing, portions of different Solera levels will be taken for the final bottling. Okay, so let's say we have Big Trill Cellars, very popular production over there in San Lucar de Barrameda. I love that Manzanilla sherry, Manzanilla. But let's say we have Big Trill Cellars. Big fucking Trill Cellars. Huge fucking deltoids. Okay, so you have Big Trill Cellars. And so you have Big Trill Cellars. We're taking a fair amount from the Solera level, and then I might take some third Criadera and some fifth Criadera, and I might blend that all into my house style, which would be my non-vintage that I release every year. And then we do that to taste every year. So one year it might be the third and fifth Criadera. One year it might be the second and sixth Criadera. You got a lot to work with. You have a lot of blending trials to undergo. But at the end of the day, it's not like with the exception of like VSOR, VS, very special, rare sherry, very old special cherry, whatever. We'll get into aging designates in a minute. The exception of that, you're usually blending different fractions of the Solera process. Okay. Which helps you to not draw off more than 40% of the Solera, the oldest level. Allows consistency over years, rinse and repeat. Youngest Criadera gets topped off by the Sobre Tablas. So makes sense. Once you get to that last level in the chain, the newest level in the chain, once you pull wine from the bottom, you're then backfilling from the top. Once you get, once you've pushed all the wine down the line and got it into a bottle, you're then refilling your stock from the Sobre Tablas with the new wine of the new year. Okay. When bottling, it is possible to select juice. Just, for instance, wine from the third and fourth Criadera. We already talked about that. Okay. Fino can also be blended into amontillados at this point. Okay. That's another important thing. A couple different wines. You're not just full biological aging. You're not just full oxidative aging. They're crossover wines. Amontillado is the most important one to remember. That starts off with biological aging and then finishes with oxidative aging, and should at the end have both attributes of both styles. So, yeah. Biological aging. Okay. Aging wine under a layer of flor. Flor is comprised of 4 yeast strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the traditional, yeast that we use for fermentation for wine. It's just 4 different strains. The yeast is coming from the grape skins in the vineyard. It's just natural ambient yeast. And it's also kind of racked up in these cellars over hundreds of years, tens of years, let's say. Wine must have a max of 15.5 ABV. Nothing above that kills the flor. SO2 also kills the flor. That's sulfur dioxide, ladies and gentlemen. Flor needs oxygen. We're partially filling these barrels. This is an important one. Don't forget to mention this. This is something stupid that I would easily forget to mention in an exam. These barrels are not filled all the way. They're filled about, I think the book says like 90%, but it looks like kind of like 90%. Is what it physically looks like in videos. So, floor needs oxygen, partial fill of the barrels, and loose bungs. Okay, keep those bungs loose. Keep your bunghole loose, bitches. Temps in the cellar need to be around the 60s with above 65 humidity to develop and retain that floor, that level of floor. Effects of the floor. The floor yeast will protect against oxidation. It consumes alcohol, turns it into acetaldehyde, which gives you your textbook kind of apple skin, hay, chamomile, those flavors. Those are flavors that are extremely important to put on a tasting exam if you have a Fino or Manzanilla sherry. Those acetaldehyde flavors are very apparent, and it is really the main thing. If you're blind tasting and you get those, good fucking chance you have one of those two wines. Okay. It also consumes glycerol, and if you're not a big time taster, you're more of a theory guy or gal. Glycerol is extremely important for me in blind tasting wines from the new world versus the old world. It's something I've picked up a lot. I work in and around production in Napa Valley, so I'm kind of a little bit more up to date, or no, that's the wrong word. I'm closer to these topics than you would be if you didn't work in a major production region. And I notice glycerol a lot. And the one thing that's really, really prominent in like Finos and Manzanillas is there's fucking no glycerol. There's no sheen. There's no layer of polish and this bad. There's no real word to describe it, but it's another alcohol, and it gives like the wine like a candy apple coating. Like I can't exactly. It's like a layer of like perfect. Makes the wine soft and silk. It's like a layer of paint on a brand new car. Doesn't have that. So the wine is really lean. It's super, super, super lean. It's super, I want to say crisp, but it's like bone. It's literally one of the driest wines you can have in the world. It's absolutely bone dry. The texture is super, super, super thin and lean. That's another important blind tasting note. Reduces levels of acetic acid, so it helps to make the wine a little bit more biologically stable. Over time, floor dies and regrows. Dead floor particles will drop to the bottom. This gives off, autolysis. We all know what autolysis is at this point. Savory, nutty flavors. Okay, young wines entering the Solera from the Sobretables include fresh nutrients into the floor. So as you are moving these down the line from vintage to vintage, and we're bottling and we're refilling, we're adding yeast nutrients to the floor. So, young wine entering the Solera. Oh yeah, sorry. Biological aged wines are drunk now. This is very important for the WSET. These are wines that are not suitable for aging. Okay, these are drink now. They've already been aged. They've already been matured, to use a technical term. You need to drink these now. These are not hold for 5 years, hold for 10 years. Don't make that argument. Don't lose points. Drink now. All right. Oxidative aging. Color changes from lemon to gold. Okay. Amber to brown. So that's your calls for visuals. For oxidative aging, alcohol slowly increases due to water evaporation. So as we have higher alcohol content, a lot of water evaporating, it's a warm region, oxidative wines will creep up in alc. As evaporation also occurs, other parts of the wine will concentrate. Glycerol rises, which gives oxidative wines more body as opposed to less for biological. Aroma and flavors increase. Heavy tertiary components become very prevalent. So we're talking caramel, toffee, nuts, ethyl acetate, and acetic acid. Both rise slightly. So we get a little bit more microbiological instability from the oxidative style. And once again, we're filling those barrels up partially to allow wine to oxidize. Precisely, not by accident. We're doing it on purpose. Finishing and packaging. Tartrate state. All wines are tartrate stabilized. Okay, they're all fine and filtered. Filters just mostly destroy floor yeast in biologically aged wine. Cork or screw top is approved. Must be bottled in 3 towns. Okay, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, Puerto de Santa Maria, or the town of Jerez in itself. So that's finishing and packaging. And there was one other thing. Oh, there is Unrama, which is listed at some point on this whole list. And Unrama is what generally refers to as raw, is what it generally translates to. And Unrama is slightly or low filtration wines. So apparently that's relatively becoming popular locally. Styles of sherry. Okay, let's get through this. Dry sherries. By law, by Consejo Regulador regulations, that they can only have a maximum of 5 grams per liter of residual sugar. Okay, the dry sherry styles that we're going to know right off the rip are Fino and Manzanilla. Okay, they've spent their entire life under floor. They are pale lemon in color. They are dry. They are light to medium bodied wines. They are low acid wines. They're very zippy. They're very lean. They're very crisp, but they have very low acid. And they have low alcohol for fortified camp. That's somewhere between 15 and 15.5. All right. Primary aromas are acetaldehyde over primary fruit. Okay. Acetaldehyde will overpower the primary fruit. You'll still get and have, primary fruit notes of like lemon and lime. Like I would choose to state citrus notes. However, I would always put hay, chamomile, apple skin, golden apple skin, yellow apple skin, dried yellow apple skin, stuff like that. Okay. Bread dough is also common. Almonds, saline, sea spray, flint. Those are all very approved words if you think you have one in your tasting. The quality level of dry sherries is usually good to all the way to outstanding. So you have most of the latter there. Manzanilla is often lighter and fresher in style than Finos, and Manzanilla needs constant floor replenishment, and it was typically bottled in smaller bottles. Okay. Manzanilla Pasada is Manzanilla wine that has had a little bit of time to oxidize. Tastes a little similar to Amontillado. This is my least favorite part of teaching and studying sherry is all these fucking different like cross all these different cross things, and we're gonna try not to focus too much on that because I would consider that more advanced stuff. Let's not really focus on that. But Amontillado, this is a style you do need to know. This is a hybrid, so it starts biological, moves into oxidative. Starts biological, 15 to 15.5% alcohol, rests under floor, then gets refortified to 17%, and then does the oxidative style, the aging. These are also usually good to outstanding. It's important to think and remember Amontillado as like the hybrid style. So Palo Cortado is extremely strange. This is one I hate fucking talking about because even the book doesn't know what the fuck it's saying. But aromas of Amontillado with the body of an Oloroso. So it's kind of like, once again, those intermediary things. It's really hard to call a wine Palo Cortado. I really wouldn't suggest making a fucking going full send and calling a wine Palo Cortado. I would probably just call it Amontillado, just to be safe. But yeah, few stipulations on winemaking after fortification. It's somewhere between 17 and 22% alcohol. Mostly wines are aged Fino for 5 years first. Wine is selected and then second class. Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, Palo Cortado, very strange. It has the aromas of the Amontillado, but the body of the Oloroso. So yeah, really important style. Fully, not a hybrid style. This is a fully oxidative style. So this is Oloroso, 100% oxidative, 17% alcohol by volume. The color is always going to be brown. It's going to have a very oxidized color. It's going to look very brown, very tawny, very brown. Tertiary, you're going to get a lot of walnuts and toffee and spent black coffee ground and a bunch of stuff like that. All level of quality, all level of price point for this. There's cheap shit, there's great shit, there's everything in between. And Ra means un or partially filtered wines. We talked about unrama for a second. Last thing we're going to talk about, fuck no, there's 2 more pages left. We're running out of recording time. Naturally sweetened wines. Okay. Once harvested, grapes for naturally sweetened wines are laid out for 2 to 3 weeks. Okay. Water will evaporate. It will concentrate flavors. It will give rise to raisin-like aromas. Right. Think like a passimento process. 2 to 3 weeks. We're letting grapes dry. Grapes. Let's just do it. Fermentation stops naturally for these wines around 4 to 6% due to the amount of high sugar content. So the wines are then fortified after that level to about 15 to 16% ABV. They are matured oxidatively in the Solera. Further evaporation and concentration will happen over time, over maturation. Okay. Most common types are PX and Muscat of Alexandria. PX sherry will give you somewhere between 212 to 550 grams per liter of residual sugar. That's fucking high, boys. Muscat, 325 to 375 grams per liter. All right. Both wines can also be used for blending to make sweetened wines. Like not, these are naturally sweetened wines with the drying of the grapes. We are also creating sweetened wines, so unnaturally sweetened wines. Definitive. Can't think of the word. Yeah. So sweetened wine. These are wines that are actively, we're going out of our way to make these sweet. So they're not inherently sweet. Palomino. We're fermenting it dry. We're fortifying it. We're aging it, and then we're sweetening it. Okay, and we're using that PX or that MOA. High quality will age even after blending. So really high quality. That's the average. Method is to farm Palomino grapes, ferment them dry, fortify them, age them, and then sweeten them all the way at the end. High quality producers will then go for another round of aging after that. You might get into your 12 to 15-year-old sherries at that point. You might get into very old special sherries. You might get into very old rare special sherries. We'll talk about that in a second. Pale cream sherry. Okay, this is a sweeten. This is a an unnaturally sweetened wine. Okay, let's just say that unnaturally sweetened wine. Biological aging prior to sweetening. We are sweetening with RCGM, rectified concentrated grape must. You should know what that is by now. You've been in the program for a long time. Okay. Subtle floral characteristics, medium sweet to sweet in taste. Pale cream is traditionally acceptable to good quality. All right. So don't expect a fucking rock star pale cream. Think Harvey's cream sherry. Okay. Think that's what your example is going to be. I have a bottle of it here somewhere. Medium and cream sherries. Okay. Medium has some flavors of biological and some flavors of oxidative. Cream will just have oxidative flavoring. All right. These are blended with PX grapes. All right. Age indication. We're getting to the end now. VOS and VORS. VOS indication is very old sherry. Fucking very brilliant. It sounds stupidly easy, but if they ask you and you totally blank, it's so easy that you actually might forget VOS if they don't list it in the actual question. So don't underthink it. Very old sherry. Average age of 20 years. The other one is the VORS. That is very old rare sherry. Okay, that is average age of 30 years. All right, these are sent to a laboratory. They are tested. They are literally carbon 14 dated. All right. These are wines that are undergo a fair amount of scrutiny. All right, and that's overseen by the Consejo Regulador. You have 12 and 15-year-old sherries. That's another category. Slightly lower average age. Undergo testing, lab analysis. Only Amontillado, Palo Cortado, Oloroso, and PX are approved for these styles. Okay, that's another thing you're going to see with older wines. You're traditionally only going to see the oxidative or hybrid styles. You're not going to see Fino and Manzanilla really getting those crazy ages. Sometimes you will, but really approval for that stuff is for the oxidative, and those are the more the age-worthy styles, I believe. Anyways, okay. Wine law and business. All right. Types of business. There's 7,000 hectares in this region. All right. The average holding of a human being that owns land is 3 hectares. Okay. So we have a lot of small producers, very traditional of European sites. We all know that from Italy and France and whatnot. 40% of all production is cooperative production. So small people banding together, making some wine. Big shippers also buy directly from small farmers. We're going to get into this right now. We're almost at the 50-minute mark. We have 3 styles of business here. And this is really confusing because not all regions have this. This is kind of something that's very sherry-esque, okay? So you have different channels of businesses. And I think you can do all 3, but they all 3 have to be separate. It's not quite like the 3-tier system in America for sales and production. So at your entry level tier, the most important tier, because you're actually making the wine, is what's called the production bodega. That's the name of the business. It's a production bodega. They are usually large co-ops. They press and ferment to base wines. Okay, so they're making huge amounts of base wines. It must be located in the sherry production zone, often owned by other styles of businesses, and the other rungs will own that style as well, but not all these, and can produce its own wines, but those production bodegas can make their own final wines, but they don't qualify for DO status. So if that's something that they're attempting to do, that's something they can't do just at that rung, okay? The next rung, the kind of middle rung, is the aging and storing bodega, okay? So that's its own business, and that's really solely for just the maturation of wine, okay? Must be located in the zona de crianza, can be very small, can also be very big, and it has to be, all that wine has to be sold to the last rung, which is the aging and shipping bodega, okay? These producers cannot make their own wine. They're solely just for aging. And the reason, and this is the hardest part of the business, and it's the most stepped on part of the business, and it's the fastest declining part of the business, because the third and final tier is what's called an aging and shipping bodega. And this tier can essentially do what that tier does, plus actually export and sell the wine under DO regulation. So, the last tier is called aging and shipping bodega. They are also just referred to generally as shippers. And these are the only registered and permitted levels to actually export or sell DO sherry and manzanilla. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, must be located in the zona de crianza. Last page, boys. Also permitted to mature wines. Shippers can use their own brands. Okay, so say you're Big Trill Shipping Company. I can market all my wine under Big Trill Shipping Company, or you can kind of like pimp out or like brand out some wine that you buy from a specific maturation house. So if we're buying from Robert Mondavi Maturation House, I, as Big Trill shipper, I can also be like, yo, check this out. This is Big Trill Shipping, but this is think of it like single vineyard designation, but it's single maturation house designation. So this is Robert Mondavi Maturation House. I would love for those bitches to work under me. Shout out Phil Mondavi. He's the homie. Shippers can use their own brands or pimp out brands from production houses. They can also blend. Okay, you can also blend. So you can have Big Trill Cellars and you can have Robert Mondavi Maturation House, and you can blend those together and then sell your own product. Maturation houses are losing a lot of money. Many of them, because of how fucked they are in that middle tier, just like not really just being a middleman tier. A lot of them, if they have the resources, are just becoming shippers because it's kind of outdated and stupid. Consejo Regulador. This is the whole Governing body of this region and this style of wine started in 1933. Easy way to remember that. It's the end of it's the repeal of American Prohibition. So just link those two things in your head. Maintaining all vineyard registers and sets max yields, minimum alcohols, and levels of the base wine. Okay, so just like any other major European PDO, AOC, DOC, all those regions, they oversee production stuff. They also oversee quality levels. So VSOR, 12, 15-year-old stuff, they are the ones that are overseeing the laboratory results and things like that. Verifying authenticity of VORS, developed the DO for Sherry Manzanilla. And it says 1990s here. I guess that's the most recent DO situation. Sherry sales, last thing. Gradual decline since 1979. Sweet styles have declined dramatically. Fino has also declined. Manzanilla is doing decently, okay? A lot of consumption, I think 1/3 of consumption is now fully in Spain, okay? So domestic consumption. A lot of domestic consumption. PCPX and age indicated are still kind of profitable, okay? So we're seeing the top end stuff, the most bougie stuff is doing okay, but as per usual with the declining market, all the mid-tier, lower-tier shit, it's just not getting it's just not moving anymore. All right, not a lot of wine being sold at the low tier. Here we go. Spain is the largest market, 1/3 of total sales. Yeah, they're favoring local people are favoring the dry style. Okay. So Fino, Manzanilla, the biggest export for the sweetened styles, and you could probably guess this, is the UK. Okay. The UK still likes sweet shit. A lot of old people out there, a lot of real dumb people out there. Sorry. And they really like the sweet, syrupy, styles that have gone out of popularity in the North American market, decades ago. Still relatively popular with the grannies in the UK. New growth in the region is coming in the form of unfortified styles. So there are people that are playing around because of the decline of the market with unfortified styles and doing kind of interesting new stuff with a Palomino grape, Muscat grape. But the story is yet to be written. So thank you guys very much. That was a lot. That was 52 minutes straight, but this is something I'm going to listen to before I go to bed every single night. Before my exams, I have about 3 more weeks. And I'm just going to keep crushing and just keep revisiting my notes. So thank you guys. God bless you. Winezilla out. Peace.